Hey, it's paved with good intentions. Yes, it really is. The truth will set you free. Unless it's a confession, then you're probably going to prison. Welcome to another episode of Paved with Good Intentions, the show that asks the difficult questions you didn't even think you cared about. I'm Danielle Kessner, and this podcast is produced sponsor-free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. Today, we're going to be talking about movie ratings. But first, here's a piece of random trivia in honor of the Denver Broncos Super Bowl victory this past weekend. Did you know that no teams in the NFL have ever played a Super Bowl in their home stadium? And the way things are going, fans won't be able to watch their team in the Super Bowl either. I mean, $15 for a beer? Better be the best damn beer you've ever had. But most people watch the Super Bowl from, their own homes for one reason, and that's commercials. And this year, commercials were weak. That's a shame given how much advertisers pay to have their advertisements air during the Super Bowl. Some of them can cost up to $5 million to air during the game. But do you really think a Budweiser commercial during the Super Bowl is going to suddenly convince you to start drinking it? Well, Peyton Manning might. Just saying. And now on to our episode, rated R for ridiculous. So, this episode is going to be kind of a rant because I don't like movie ratings. I'm just going to put that right out there. Even though at this point in my life, it really doesn't matter because I haven't had to prove to someone that I was of age to see a movie in quite some time. But even still, movie ratings do not make sense to me, and they never really have. So let me kind of get into when we talk about movie ratings, we're talking about here in the US, we have the Motion Picture Association of America, the MPAA for short, for those of you who like abbreviations. So MPAA ratings basically rate a movie with one of 5 ratings. They either say it's rated G, which means it's general audience, but means anybody can see it. PG, meaning parental guidance is suggested, meaning if there's a chance that, there might be something in there that the kids, might be a little hard for the kids, so the parents should probably, take notice before letting their kids see it. There's PG-13, which is basically saying that, I don't know if there's a reason they landed on 13, but that, if you're under 13, then parental guidance is strongly suggested. Over 13, nobody cares. And then there's R, which is restricted, so that means anybody under the age of 17 should not be seeing this or cannot see this without a parent accompanying them. And so that means that they can still see it as long as the parent is there to watch it with them. And then there's NC-17, which doesn't happen very often, but there are movies that do get that rating. And NC-17 is basically saying if you are under 17 or younger, you can't see this movie at all. So don't even try. Even with their parent, you can't see this movie. And usually movies that get NC-17 ratings, a lot of times they, chop them down or cut little pieces out of them in order to get them down to that R rating. Because if it's NC-17, there's no way in hell a major movie theater chain is going to pick that up. You're not going to be able to go down to the AMC 24 and see, a movie with an NC-17 rating there. It happens, but it's exceedingly rare. Most of those get relegated to art house because they know this movie is not going to bring in a lot of revenue. It's a movie that's going, just the rating alone is not going to bring in revenue. And these ratings, especially in the last 15, 20 years, have become more and more descriptive. So it's saying it's rated PG-13 because of these certain details. It's rated PG-13 because of, and some of them are really strange. They say like a disturbing image or a scene of violence or brief suggestive material, something like that. I mean, something that, if you read just that, you're like, okay, not sure what that means. And maybe one person's suggestion is another person's just like, I've seen it a million times before, I don't care. But the whole point of these ratings is that they are a guide. It's that, when a movie gets a rating, it's to say, you are advised that this movie has certain things in it that you should be, that you should be aware of. And it's mostly for parents, because obviously once you hit the NC-17, once you hit that like 17-year-old threshold, then it's like, it doesn't matter. I mean, you can go see the movie, anything or not. So there is actually this legal aspect to it. The only movies that actually do have legal restriction are R and NC-17. So if you are 15 years old and you want to go see an R-rated movie, so if you want to go see Deadpool, then you're going to have to, show an ID, and if that ID says that you're under 17, you can't come in without a parent or a guardian. So there is actually a legal recourse to that. And which is strange because the whole idea of the rating is a guide. It's supposed to inform people of what the content of the movie is like. It's like, okay, I see a preview for this movie. What kind of movie is it going to be? Is it going to be a movie that has, good, clean humor? Is it going to be family friendly? Or is it something that's going to be just hardcore, as they like to call the hard R movies, that have lots of, sex, drugs, violence, all the crazy stuff that, people want to see in a movie like Deadpool. So, why does this have me hot and bothered? Because, again, it doesn't affect me at all, but it is something that it actually does affect me in a way because there are movies that come out that studios make a conscious decision to say, okay, instead of making this movie R, let's cut down some of the things to make it PG-13. Or let's look at this movie and say, well, this is kind of more of our art house type of movie, so let's do what we can to get it an R rating so that it's not, bombarded with. Because when people see PG-13, they think, oh, well, just anybody can go see it. So it's going to be, you're going to have, a gang of teenagers going to see The King's Speech, which is not necessarily true because why would teenagers want to see The King's Speech? It's actually a good movie. Teenagers don't like good movies. And but the studios then make these conscious decisions to basically say, okay, we're going to try to do whatever we can to give this movie a certain rating. Deadpool, which is coming out soon, is one of these movies that had this problem. For a while, it was unrated. Nobody knew what the rating was going to be, and that scared a lot of people because they wanted Deadpool to be a hard R movie. We need a comic book movie that is just flat out crazy, violent, profane, all this stuff, because that's what Deadpool is. Deadpool is not your like X-Men, your typical X-Men guy. He is, you know, crazy, and that's what they wanted in this movie. So for a while it was unrated, and that's because the studio is doing everything they can to get that rating that they want, which, you know, in this case they actually probably were in the situation where it was too hard R, and they actually had to, talk it down from an NC-17 rating. That's my guess, but it's just given the nature of this type of movie. But there's other movies that don't make a lot of sense, and especially when you get down into like the subtleties of things. Um, Frozen, for example. This movie came out a few years ago, and when it came out, there was an article that someone wrote about why is Frozen rated PG. Frozen was rated PG, which basically means that there's content in here that parents should be aware of for their kids and should be advised that this might not be something you want your kids to see. After seeing the movie Frozen, I agreed with this article 100% that there was nothing in this movie that put it as more troublesome than some of the other movies that had previously been rated G. From what it seems to me is that there's been this kind of like shift over the past 25, 30 years from what was once considered PG and now what is considered PG. Because you watch a movie like Airplane, Airplane would be probably PG-13 pushing R today, whereas in, 1981 it was PG because it had nudity, it had, cursing, it had drug use, it had all sorts of crazy stuff. And today that would probably be, pushing the R limit with the way it is today. Spaceballs, another example, a movie that really pushed limits today would probably be, a hard PG-13 movie. So somewhere along the way, the ratings got shifted because when I look at a movie like Frozen, I don't see a PG movie. I see a movie that is definitely rated G. Everything, it's lighthearted. The villains aren't even that scary. There's nothing scary in this movie that would terrify a child. I mean, they say like some scary imagery. They're probably talking about like the ice monster, which itself is actually kind of a goofy thing. Or, they talk about, like the peril of, maybe like when Hans is, about to kill Elsa or something like that. Back up about, 10, 15 years from Frozen to a little movie called The Hunchback of Notre Dame. This is a Disney movie. This is a Disney version of a story that should not have been Disneyfied in the first place, but they did it and it actually turned out pretty good. But they rated it G, and how they got a G rating out of that, it will forever be beyond me. And I think that's because things started to shift to where they were a little bit more hesitant to throw the G rating on some if there was even the slightest indication that something would have been scary for little kids. Hunchback of Notre Dame involves things like basically lust, like strong, hardcore lust, which almost leads to rape. They have extreme violence, they have murder, and they have a character who is one of the most terrifying characters in a Disney movie ever, in Frollo. He's insane. This guy is absolutely crazy. There's even a song that he sings about hellfire. And this movie got rated G, which makes no sense to me when you look at something like Frozen, which gets rated PG because of what? There's a scene where she kind of almost stabs a dude in the neck with, an icicle. That's perilous, but I wouldn't say that it's something that a kid is going to have nightmares over necessarily. So there's times where the ratings just don't make sense, like where they give something, they're too cautious with something. And then there's that other side, like I said, with the King's Speech. The King's Speech does have the F bomb dropped quite a few times, but they do it. It's in context. Who cares? I guess some people obviously do care, but in the context of the movie, it's not like Samuel L. Jackson in Snakes on a Plane kind of thing, or Django. That's Samuel L. Jackson at his finest. But take a movie like There Will Be Blood. One of the best movies of the past 15 years is There Will Be Blood. It's an amazing movie. It got an R rating, and you think, okay, it's called There Will Be Blood, so it's probably got some violence in it, maybe. It's about oil, so maybe, it's pretty mild violence. There's points in the movie where they're talking pretty harshly about one another, very, violent talk. Nothing actually comes of it. There's a couple scenes where there's a little bit of violence, and then everything culminates at the end where, there's some violence at the end of the movie, and that's it. That is all there is in terms of what would make that movie rated R. There's no nudity, there's no sex, there's no drugs, there's no real violence. There's just that one scene at the end of the movie. There's no cursing. I mean, it's how this movie got an R rating is beyond me. But then you look, what is that kind of movie? It's a movie that, it's Oscar bait movie. It's one that they're trying to, make really artistic and all that. So maybe it's like, well, we'll push for the R rating so that way we don't have a bunch of kids going in to see this movie and disrupting it for people who, are there for the movie experience. And that's ridiculous. That's not always how it happens, but there's just movies that get an R rating that probably don't deserve it. Let's look at The Matrix for a second. When The Matrix came out, it was rated R. It still is. And you look at it in terms of today's violence. I mean, why did it get rated R? It was because of the violence. There's a lot of, gunplay and stuff like that in that movie. There's not a ton of blood. There's a lot of gunplay, though. When you look at it today in terms of the context of movies like, Fast and Furious, which have a ton of gunplay and violence and car chases, you know, Winter Soldier is a great example of a movie that had a ton of gunplay and yet is PG-13 by virtue of being a comic book movie. The Matrix, the original Matrix, probably could have gotten away with a PG-13 by today's standards. There's maybe just a couple of things that would have, pushed it over the edge in terms of violence, because it's not like there's a bunch of nudity. It doesn't have the orgy scene like in Matrix Reloaded. The violence is, there, but it's not like, look at something like Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings got rated PG-13, and it had, head chopping and people getting impaled and, like just ripped apart and all this stuff. But because a lot of those things weren't actually human, it's okay. As long as humans aren't getting killed, it's okay. This kind of gets into the crux of my whole argument of why this whole thing annoys me, is because movie ratings are so arbitrary. They are completely arbitrary, and they actually do affect the final viewing, the final movie that I get to see. There's movies that, are rated PG-13 that it's like they could have done more to make this movie to like actually make the movie they wanted to make. But it would have gotten the R rating, so they wanted to pull it back. Things like violence, they're gonna cut like a split second of the violence out, so it's like, okay, so now we don't see the blood splatter, we just see the death. That's fine. Seeing people die is fine as long as we don't see a bunch of blood splatter. Sex is fine as long as there's no pelvic thrust. Nudity is fine as long as it's, no nipples are covered, no genitalia, things like that. That's okay. You can show everything else as long as you're not showing that. Some movies even get PG-13 ratings because somebody is smoking, which, I mean, I get it. You don't want kids to smoke, but to actually rate a movie that way because of smoking is kind of ridiculous to me. I mean, there are times where smoking, it's there. It doesn't really actually have an effect on anything. It's just there. And then, drug use, there's movies that, people are going crazy on drugs. Those I can understand, but what it really comes down to for me is the fact that it is, because there is that legal side of it, it's not just that these movie ratings are a guide. There is a legal side of it that prevents people, younger people from going to see movies that are rated R. Like a lot of teenagers probably wanted to go see Straight Outta Compton, but they couldn't because it's rated R, and so okay, now they can't do it. I mean, it was justifiably rated R, but it was also a fantastic movie and had a lot of really powerful stuff in it, and good stuff that I think people should see. There's nothing wrong with that. The King's Speech was a good movie. I didn't see that there was anything there that kids shouldn't have been able to see. Just a couple of bad words. It should really be up to the parents to decide, though. Really, what it should come down to is a parent knows, okay, so this movie is rated R, and that means it has this violence and stuff. I want it's okay if my kid sees it, or no, I don't want to see it, or I don't want my kid to see it. That's up to the parents. It shouldn't be something that's legal. That is a matter of like, my parents don't care if I go see this movie, so why do you care? I'm going to see it anyway. Why does it matter why does it matter to you whether I see this or not? I mean, it comes down to informed consent. If somebody, I mean, at what point do we say informed consent is enough? Like, it should be enough for somebody to say, okay, you have advised me of this. Okay, so it's violent, so, I'm going to weigh that option of whether or not I want to see it because of the violence or the sex or whatever. Informed consent should be enough. And same goes for parents. So some parents saying, yes, no, that's okay. Why does the movie theater? They're getting their money anyway, and actually the movie theater doesn't even get the money. The money goes to the studio. The studios are getting their money anyway. The MPAA exists solely to do what? What is the point other than it should only be to inform people of this, but instead they've put this legal aspect to it where now you can't see a movie if you're under a certain age because of how it's rated, or you can't see it without parents. And how many parents want to go see a movie like Straight Outta Compton? I'm not saying that they wouldn't, but there's a lot who are like, I'm not really a big fan of rap, so I don't want to go see this movie about a bunch of rappers. So the kids though, they're like, I want to see this. It looks good. I want to watch this movie. It should come down to informed consent. One of the things that always bothered me about this is that if a parent says it's okay, that should be enough. In high school, we were watching the movie Unforgiven, which was rated R. We had to do permission slips and all that to be able to watch the movie in class. Do you know who brought that movie in for the class to watch? This one. I own the movie. I brought it into class, and I still had to have my parents sign a permission slip to allow me to watch it. That's how ridiculous these type of things are. Is movie ratings, there's the legal aspect of it that, make no sense, because if parents say it's okay, if it's informed consent, if you have that, then what else does there need to be? I realize there's a slippery slope there of having like a 5-year-old going up asking to go see Straight Outta Compton, but why is that 5-year-old by himself anyway at the movies? That's the bigger problem. So parents should be allowed to decide what their kids watch, and kids at the same time should be able to have informed enough consent to say, I'm okay with watching this, or I'm not, and discuss that with their parents. The MPAA should have no authority over that. That's just my opinion. So, All right, well, thank you for watching. You can check out more of Paved with Good Intentions right here on YouTube or on iTunes and Stitcher. You can also check out my other videos and anything I've ever favorited. Be sure to check out my other podcast, Translation, which is found at the link below, as well as on iTunes and Stitcher. You can visit me on Twitter at Danny Kestner, or you can find me on Facebook. If you have any questions you'd like me to ponder on the show, send me an email at translationpodcast@gmail.com. I do want to hear from you. My inbox is so empty. Once again, this podcast is produced sponsor free, so thank you for supporting independent artists. We'll see you on the other side.